Welcome to the Career Cafe, a place where teenagers ask experts. Today, we will be discussing biotechnology with our expert over some croissant. We will go in depth about the scope of biotechnology as a future career and the preparation and skills required for it. Along with that, we will also be exploring the subspecialties of biotechnology, such as genetic engineering, its applications, and the ethical dilemmas that occur within it. I'm your host, Kaushik Patra, and I look forward to discussing your questions with the expert. Today, we have Dr. Samuel McCallum. He has a PharmD and a major in health information technology from the University of South Carolina. He currently works as a senior safety scientist at Genentech. Thank you for joining us today. We are very grateful to have you here today, Dr. McCallum.
Thank you for having me.
We received a multitude of questions from our audience, and I am sure that they are very keen to listen and tune in on this episode. So, here's a common question that we got, and it's probably the first question that occurs to anyone's mind when they think of considering biotechnology as a career option. What is the scope of biotechnology as a career? And what are some of the attributes that make a person suitable for this role?
Yeah, I think it's an awesome question and something it's a valid question. And it's hard almost to start even with what the scope of it is, because really I think biotechnology as a field is so incredibly broad, and using the term biotechnology encompasses, I mean, if you really take the root word of biotechnology, it's all of the knowledge that we have about basically like the art of life and understanding life and
Yeah.
engineering and working with different concepts that can affect living things. And it's a really challenging thing to define sort of the beginning and an end, right? Because I think there's so much still unexplored and big opportunity within the field. But if I were to sort of quantify or qualify the things that I think are really helpful in the field of biotechnology, particularly in my field, which is the medical biotechnology space, I think that your drive to know and understand and curiosity is what's going to drive the most success for an ideal candidate. It's not an easy field to understand. It's a lot of things about genetic science and understanding, particularly in my space in healthcare, understanding how we can target specific genes or how we can instruct specific proteins and aspects of, particularly in people, to sort of heal or to improve or to overcome deficiency or some sort of biologic challenge that faces us. It takes a lot of robust science, all the way from the molecular level up to the understanding of medical effects and downstream impacts of what the modifications or changes or targets you're hitting might be. And so you really have to have that curiosity and a desire to understand the whole instead of just the focused little part of maybe particularly what your piece of it is. And I don't think anybody is capable of really understanding the end-to-end spectrum. That's why we have so many subspecialties within the broad world of biotechnology. So if I were to sort of qualify what I think that ideal person looks like, that would be it. It'd be a lot harder for me to put a qualification behind, which specific degree you need or which specific background experience you would need to have, because it's so variable depending on which space you're going to come into. But scientific curiosity and the ability to take complex information, think analytically, apply a lot of really fundamental learning skills to be able to sort of drive an answer, follow a scientific method, develop a really good research question, analyze it appropriately. Those are all going to drive success across, any scientific discipline. But I think it's especially valuable as it relates to biotechnology, because a lot of times I feel like we have more questions than answers. And the people that are going to be really successful are those that can take those questions and turn them into answers.
Yeah, I agree. It's a relatively new science, as a matter of fact. And I mean, in that sense, like you said, there must be a lot of scope and a lot of new discoveries being made. So you mentioned genetics and medical biotechnology. And many of us students like have this misconception that the majority of biotechnology is related to genetic editing, modification. But I'm sure there is more to biotechnology and there are more branches of knowledge. Can you
Sure.
elaborate on those?
Yeah, I think that's, when you hear about, I'm not sure if you're familiar with like CRISPR or any of the
Yeah.
sort of gene edit, they have all these news articles out now. You can edit a gene from your garage is the big tagline I've heard multiple times. And I think that's the sort of exciting and sort of questionable science. And there's a lot of different directs that can carry down. And so that's, I think, the public perception. If you say the word biotechnology, people think, scary, superheroes or something like that. But yeah, as far as genetic editing and modification, I mean, even that itself has so much different, there are so many different aspects of what that could mean. So, are you editing a gene that created a disability, and are you improving that gene to enable somebody to live a more, a less painful life, or a less limited life physically, or extending life? Or are you editing a gene to create some other thing that probably would be less ethical? Um, but I don't think that when you think of biotechnology and you think about gene editing, I don't think the scope of biotechnology is limited to that. And I know that biotechnology is not limited to that. We have ongoing global challenges of food shortages. Biotechnology is what's been capable of improving crop yields for the last, I don't know how many decades. Biotechnology is what it takes to modify corn to be able to grow in less efficient environments and feed the world. Biotechnology is a term that you could apply to certain types of medical advances like proteins that are curing cancers. And it's not necessarily that you're editing like a human gene or anything like that, but like potentially, you work on developing a vaccine, or you develop an antibody that's, essentially at the end of the day, basically a protein that is coded by some sort of gene somewhere, and is able to treat disease or cure whatever malady that you're intending to treat. And that I just, the scope of that is so broad that, you can't, in this short time that we have, to dive into all of the details of that. But it is a really fascinating field as you dive into it more and more. I think there's a lot of opportunity for exploring beyond just that sort of narrow, limited scope of editing a gene and creating a result. There's so many applications of what this could be, and also not limiting the scope to thinking that gene editing is only for cancer or only for particular genetic diseases or anything like that. There's so many different applications, and I'm sure there are lots of questions that are out there that we still don't fully understand. And this is even my limited scope. Even though I sort of work in the field, this is my limited scope and my own just personal perspective on it, because there's so much out there that I don't understand, and that people who have been doing this far longer than me don't understand. Because the application of technology to life, which I think is what biotechnology is at the end of the day, is just such a broad field. And it's not like, as you said, to answer your simpler question of is it true or false that this pertains really only to genetic editing and modification, I think it's false. There's so much out there that's beyond the confines of that limitation.
Indeed, and it must be hard to quantify all of these fields. You just mentioned like the applications of biotechnology and its healthcare, agriculture, defense, and I've heard of DNA being used as a form of computer storage. So, looking at this, like there could be many pathways that a person could take to have an occupation in biotech, and like that involves like learning and researching about biotechnology. What would, in this context, what would that person require? Like, is a PhD necessary or a doctorate necessary for biotechnology? Or is it something that you can do in your garage, like you just mentioned about CRISPR?
Oh, I think that there's, depending on who you are, what your interest is, and your level of passion for it, there are, I'm sure, unlimited pathways into the field of biotechnology. And when I say into the field of biotechnology, I mean the many disciplines that biotechnology encompasses. So if your interest is in working on genes and being in a lab and working on specific sequences and studying DNA, different permutations of ATCG, you're likely going to need some sort of advanced degree, in my experience or view or opinion, simply because the majority of that is all going to be through academic institutions or through large companies that recruit out of major academic institutions. So if you're really interested in that side of it, and that is a very limited piece, I think, of the world of what biotechnology is, then of course going into the science, the natural sciences disciplines, and looking at biology, chemistry, biochemistry. There's degrees and PhDs in biotechnology these days, master's programs in biotechnology. There's undergraduate programs that different sorts of engineering courses that, or even chemistry or natural science, programs, disciplines that can get you into the field, I'm sure, and if that's your passion. But I think it's more important to have the real drive to do whatever piece of the industry it is you're getting into. And that's global career advice, even if it's biotechnology or outside of biotechnology. I mean, if you want to be an actor, you need to get some experience acting. If you want to work in a specific field, you need to get some experience, working in that field. So if you can find internships in labs or, fellowship programs or any sort of applied experience, even if it's just assisting with basic, laboratory, you could start out cleaning lab supplies or something and just be getting the experience of being around the lab team from a young age, going all the way up to, potentially running a lab someday or having a sort of your own research grant and things to run these sorts of studies. And that comes, with a lot of time and a lot of input. But I will also say, outside of that academic space, there are a lot of applications of biotechnology that probably wouldn't require that intensive of a course load. So if you want to be on the business side of things and understanding, how do we get advanced medicines and protein medicines into the hands of patients or customers, there's totally different routes that you can go down and be on the business side of things. If you want to answer questions about the medical side of it, if you want to work in clinical trials or clinical research, and instead of working on the piece itself, there's a whole separate field, which is my field of, somebody else has developed this, somebody either within our company or outside of the company or whatever, develops a new thing, a new molecule, or a new tool, diagnostic tool, or a new medicine somehow that then we want to use to help treat a condition or a disease, or use cancer as an example. Then there's the medical side where we need to figure out, is this going to be safe for people? What do we expect? Is it going to be effective? And there's a whole science of understanding the biological impact of that, to understanding the medical aspects of that and how we're going to treat the dose you're going to give them and things. So that there's a really interesting science on that side, which would require a whole separate academic discipline of going into some sort of medical field, whether that be, I went the pharmacy route. My doctorate is in pharmacy, so I understand how drugs work really well, and everything that comes along with pharmacy, which is a whole separate discussion. And then there's obviously medicine. You could become a physician and work in this space as well. And really, depending on what field you go down or what route you take, there's so many different paths that, again, it's one of those things where biotechnology becomes so broad that you could really go a lot of different ways. Like if you wanted to work in crops, it would be a really different field than working in proteins that are treating cancer. So once again, it's sort of what your interest is and what you want your expertise to be at the end of the day, that are going to drive your decisions as far as academic training go. For people, especially people like your age, who are going to be entering a sort of a college career, university career in the next couple of years, I would really encourage you to do a lot of reading and just discovering what you're really passionate about. Because at the end of the day, too, if DNA technology and vectors and viral vectors and all these things sound really interesting to you, that could be a really awesome field. But if it's just something that you're thinking, well, that could be a good career or a stable job or something, it's you're not going to be passionate about it, and you're probably not going to have a lot of success because it's a really challenging space as well. So finding your passion, I think, especially for people at your age, that's just going to lend you so much success later in life, regardless of if you decide to go into biotechnology or acting or anything else.
Yeah, very true. Biotech does share like a lot of common wisdom, and some parts of going into a field are shared by many of these career paths. So yeah, like biotech, like it's just one part of these the life sciences, the natural sciences, whatever people call them. And I
Yeah,
mean, there's a lot of common knowledge between medicine and pharmacy and medical biotech and gene editing. So, I mean, what part of biotechnology stood out to you and motivated you? And like, how did your high school and undergraduate experience contribute to this?
sure. Yeah, so I can give you my background. So going as far back as high school, I guess, I think much like you, I was in an IB program, and I really became curious about how we know things and how we understand things things. We had a theory of knowledge course, and it was something that just expanded my mind and made me think in new ways. And I can actually trace a lot of my curiosities in science back to some of the things that I learned in high school. And I wanted to go into a scientific discipline knowing that I had that deep curiosity to just learn about the world around me. So of course, I loved my science classes in high school, and I, nerded out over all of the scientific things that I could back in the day. And my mom was also a nurse, so I learned a lot from her about the medical field and working with patients. And I saw the compassion she had, the empathy that she had for the people she worked with. So I thought to myself that I wanted to do something like that. I wanted to go into healthcare, and I knew that that would help me kind of work in the scientific space as well all through my university career. So I studied pharmacy. I decided basically I wanted to understand how medicine worked. So I went into pharmacy, and throughout my experiences there, I gained a lot of mentors along the way who sort of helped me figure out what my interests were. I did a little bit of lab research, and there's a lot of different types of mentorship. I had mentorship in a lab for a very brief period of time where I immediately realized that being in a lab was not for me, because it didn't suit all of my personality strengths, my academic strengths. It was not to be in a lab doing chemical reactions all day long. So I really enjoyed working in the clinic. I enjoyed working with patients. I enjoyed understanding how the medications work and what the impact was on people. So I decided to continue my career after pharmacy school. During pharmacy school, like I said, I did some internship in the pharmaceutical industry. And I decided that I really wanted to continue along that path. I had another really great mentor who pushed me into the field of safety and understanding how we can ensure that the appropriate level of safety for patients in clinical trials and then later drug development. And even once the drugs are on the market, how do we make sure that we're appropriately informing people of the risks associated with the medication, in addition to the benefits associated with them? And that really intrigued me because it sort of mixed my clinical experience and my desire to help people with this scientific discipline of understanding and researching, side effects basically of drugs, and developing that whole scientific method, like I mentioned before. And that's sort of what pushed me into the medical side of things. And that's basically what I do now. So I pursued a fellowship after I completed my PharmD, and then decided to keep working in the field as I continued to sort of specialize. And I think that my path into that is not unique in that I know a lot of people who sort of followed a similar journey into their respective fields of the space that I work in. So people have a passion for healthcare and business, and you might end up in a role where you're working in business for healthcare, and it just makes sense to have a person like that in that role, right? If my passions were um, you know how do I like making how do people work together, like running a business is operational side, and also healthcare, maybe I would work in clinical operations because that would make sense because I'm making people work together to drive a result, and it's associated with healthcare, which I'm passionate about. So I've seen people fall into their fields based off of what their sort of passions and expertises were. And I can definitely say that at this point, what drives people's success into obtaining those positions is that extra sort of factor that they have beyond other people, other candidates, which is the passion for what they do. And that's why I think all of my experiences pushed me here, because I just sort of found the things I was passionate about and things that I enjoyed, and they sort of mixed into this really perfect field for me. And I think that most people have something like that out there for them. It's just a matter of asking all the right questions, finding the right mentors, and being guided into the right sort of discipline of what you want to do in the end.
So helping people was like a hook for you that got you into biotechnology.
Absolutely. On the medical side, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. As a safety scientist at a biotech corporation, I mean, there are a lot of factors that come in. And how does your day in a life as a biotechnologist look like? Does this job involve like a lot of lab hours? And what are like the skills that you use?
No, and that's, I think, funny because you asked a question earlier about misconceptions about biotechnology as well. And just to exemplify how broad biotechnology is, my job is I don't have a lab. I don't work in a lab. There's nothing that I do at all that's in a lab. My role is entirely based on um, understanding data and taking data from any sort of source. If somebody has a side effect with a medication that I work with. My job is basically to understand the why it happened, if it's related to the drug or if it's related to something else, if understanding um, what sort of actions we can take to make sure that people don't get the same side effect, in the future taking our drug. And that's a really overly simple way of describing what I do, but um, at the end of the day, really, my job looks like going into an office and working on a computer from an outside viewer, because that's really at the end of the day what I do. But I'm not in a lab. I'm not mixing chemicals. Once upon a time in my academic career, sure, I did all the natural science labs and did all the reactions, and I understand those things. But I don't do it on a day-to-day basis. And I think that exemplifies just how broad the scope of biotechnology is, because the person that's working in the lab and doing the laboratory expertise piece doesn't have the time or the bandwidth or the really just the amount of time that it would take to also be the person who designs a clinical study to make sure that it works in people, or to um, interpret the data from that study, or to work with health authorities. Like I'm not sure who the health authority is in India, but in the US we have the FDA, and we like we who's going to work with the FDA to make sure that we're staying compliant and making sure that we're doing the right things and keeping patients safe, and making sure we're informing everybody of all the right stuff and being compliant. So that sounds boring, but I find it actually very interesting. And there's different people that do all those different steps, and there's actually, as far as the whole process of getting a new biotechnology innovation, sure, that's happening in a lab. But all the way down the line, there's so many other thousands of players that come in to make sure that take it from that time in the lab into the hands of people. It's like it's kind of analogous to Bill Gates and Microsoft. Bill Gates probably didn't build the computer that you bought. He might have designed the basis for that computer 45 years ago, but he didn't build the computer that you're now working on that's based on all of his knowledge. So it's sort of the same way in biotechnology. That initial drug or molecule or genetic innovation that somebody comes up with, there's so many other people that are playing into getting that into the hands of people that need it at the end of the day. That's why I think it's so broad too, because you could have a million different kinds of path into working somehow in relation to the field of biotech.
So is this process rushed a bit? Because like I believe in like developing a drug, there may be like many rival entities and corporations working
Mm-hmm.
tirelessly towards that drug or towards that issue. So
Sure.
is this process very rushed, and like does it like have to be a struggle to be the first one to file a patent on this certain process?
It's a very good question. It's I think a challenge. It's not a decision that I get to make at my level at the end of the day. But no, I think that there's a constant struggle between, obviously, if we have a really exciting innovation, we want to get it into the hands of people as early as possible because those people deserve the help. But there's also the length of the process is dependent upon how long. Really, I think it's on how long does it take us to answer the fundamental questions of, is this safe for people, and is it going to be effective at what we want it to be effective at? Those are the two really big principal questions that people like the FDA or other health authorities around the world are going to be asking. And are we making sure that we're answering those questions before we release something that could potentially, cause an issue down the road? Those are the questions that any pharmaceutical company or any biotechnology company has to really come to terms with before they release a product. And it's the same with tech companies and everybody else too. You need to make sure your software works before you release it, but you obviously want to release your new patch or your new update before the other guy does. And I think that's any business, that can really. I don't think anybody wants to sit on a product and wait for all their competition to release their stuff before they release it, unless you're Apple with the iPhone, because they come late with everything. But um, I think that the knowledge that you want to share it as early as possible. Sure, there's a business side of it, but I think the more important piece is really, it's almost, in my mind, unethical to hold on to knowledge if you know it can make the world a better place for however many people. And not, why would you not release it and help those people? So at the end of the day, I think that that's the question the constant balance that the industry fights with is, answer the questions enough so that we can make sure that it's safe and effective and then get it in the hands of people.
What's good for the people, that should be like a center for anyone
It
working
is,
in this
yeah.
field. Yeah, I
It should
mean,
always
science is
it
all
should
about
always be.
development. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, nobody's trying to create, I mean, maybe somebody is, but I'm certainly not trying to create anything that's going to be harmful or so the end of the day, your primary person that you keep in your mind is always, it has to be the patient, or the subject or whatever, even if it's I think that applies to any field in biotech as well. Like if I'm developing the new variety, the new strain of corn is the example I like, because it seems like corn is in everything we eat these days, or potatoes, one of the two. If I'm creating a new variety of corn that is, yields more crop per acre or whatever the term is, um, I want to make sure that that corn is not going to, make people sick, or that it's going to be edible, or so you have to answer those questions the same way. And it's at the end of the day, you're not thinking about, is my corn going to look good? It's, is this corn going to solve the problem? Is it going to make people have more food? Is it going to, make the farmers have more yield? Is it, X, Y, Z? So I think, yeah, at the end of the day, that should always be the drive behind your question. Your scientific question is what is it? What benefit is this going to provide in the end?
Biotechnology, like even in the recent years, uh,
Yeah,
it has been
develop, yeah.
subjected to like heavy ethical questioning, and it retains a huge power. I mean, it can change ecosystems, it can increase biodiversity, at the same time decrease it. It can create like medicines, genetic medicines for people, but at the same time, you can weaponize it. So, on this ethical stance, what is your perspective? And like, should technologies like CRISPR be limited to academic people, or should it be allowed for like all the people to use CRISPR in their garage, for example?
Yeah, that's a hard question, and I think it's a very polarizing question. Some people, think that if you limit it to certain places, that you're not allowing the innovation that could potentially be, really beneficial to humanity. And then on the other hand, you have, well, what's the risk of if not saying that it is, obviously not. This is just an example. But it's something like a virus on the scale of COVID. If something like this were to be man-made, which potentially could be possible in the realm of biotechnological capacities, um, that's something that you wouldn't want in the hands of somebody who's trying to create harm, right? And I think the challenge is in finding that, again, in finding the balance. But I don't really have a clear answer for you on that, because I even myself, I struggle with who should be allowed to use these really powerful tools. Something like CRISPR that you can literally do in your garage is kind of scary to me, especially if it goes unchecked. But that's not to say that people doing CRISPR in their garage are necessarily trying to do harm. So I don't know where I stand on it. And I think time will tell as we sort of understand more and more about the impact of putting this in more people's hands, what may come of it. As a field, I think if we talk about ethics in biotechnology, of course, there are things that are very, I guess, historically taboo that you hear about with editing genes. Like we don't want to edit to. I think there was an example that came out of China a few years ago where they had sort of gene edited babies to sort of have like the ideal genetic traits that the parents desired. And of course, that's something that's met with a lot of questioning from the international community, because it's a really big ethical question but it's sort of a blurred line, because there are also genetic counselors in healthcare who are able to advise parents on the risk of their child having a certain disease, and at what line does that boundary get crossed of ethics. And I'm definitely not the person to answer that question. I've heard these questions posed before. As a whole, I think biotechnology has done a tremendous amount of good for the world. The fact that we are able to continuously feed a population that has the global population that has doubled in the last 50 years. The human race has a big food challenge that's upcoming in the next several decades, and I think it's going to be people like you and younger than you that are really going to have to, um, be the people who provide the answers to some of these really thought-provoking questions about how do we make sure that the world stays fed? How do we continue to, you know, grow enough trees to, keep the climate from boiling over in our, in future lifetimes? How do we keep the air clean? How do we find new sources of fuel? And the list goes on and on and on. And not all of these things are going to be answered by manipulating proteins or genes or anything like that, but some of them very much will be. Um, and I find it fascinating every time I see a news article about some great thing that biotechnology is doing, like finding an algae that cleans ocean water of plastic, or finding a virus that can be used for good to prevent a gene from causing some sort of illness, or finding that new crop that yields 10 times more crop than the previous thing that keeps more people fed for a lower cost. I think those are the big sort of humanitarian questions that the global field of biotechnology, not just medical biotechnology, but really all of the science behind, working with genetics and working with proteins. All of these things are answering really, really big questions like that. And I'm so happy to see that people are so passionate about solving these problems. And for every bad documentary out there about how the world is ending, I think there's an equally sort of optimistic uh, question that's being asked in science of how are we going to solve this problem, and people really diving into the research to create those answers from these questions, like I kind of started with. um, and really that's the opportunity. So to me, there's no question that there's a positive ethical side to biotechnology and the science that's being done. I think the only the questions around what's unethical is coming more from the realm of the what if, and what if people use this in the wrong way. And of course, we didn't touch on warfare or defense, which because I really don't know much about that field, but there are some scary questions on that side of things, I'm sure. But as far as what's actually been produced and utilized in mass around the world, I think biotechnology has done some tremendous good, and I hope to continue to see it doing that and answering those questions for many years to come.
Yeah, it's not up to one person to decide who gets what. Now, a final question to wrap today's discussion, and this is for anyone who wishes to come into biotech.
Mhm.
So, like biotech 30, 50 years ago was much different than the way it happens today. And
Oh yeah.
yeah, and like back then, we didn't use as many computers for research, but today we do. And like there's a new field of life science, computational biology, that's coming up. And in that sense, what are few of the subjects that are necessary for a person to study before they enter biotech?
Yeah, that's a good question. So of course, the fundamentals are going to be um, biology, chemistry, organic chemistry, as much biochemistry as you can get to understand as small as you can get into biological pathways, because at the end of the day, that's really what the science is about. Then beyond that, there's specializations. You could be in some sort of molecular engineering kind of route. You could be very advanced in the medical side. You could be very advanced in the plant biology side. I'm sure there are many different routes, but at the end of the day, those are going to be the natural sciences are going to be I think the foundation of a successful career. The other side of it, and I think this is becoming more and more true, is having a knowledge of an analytical mindset. So statistical capabilities in science are really important these days. Understanding how to run a proper statistical test, how to compare different outcomes, how to design a study, like epidemiology type things, how to work on a computer and program some, not necessarily advanced programming for certain fields, but for some disciplines, programming is a really big key. Things like IBM Watson and quantum computing, I'm sure in the next few years will take off in major strides. And the complexity of things like DNA and proteins, there's such massive amounts of data required to manipulate those things on a computer in meaningful ways. I think things like the potential applications of things like quantum computing and massive amounts of increased computing power are going to be really I think, world changing in the realm of what we're able to interpret and learn from these complex things like proteins. I'm not sure if you've ever looked at a protein structure, but it's so incredibly complex compared to a very small molecule of something like a salt or a caffeine or protein. Yeah, proteins and these things that are really complex are going to require more and more ability to compute and design really complex sort of machine learning AI kind of algorithms uh, and programs that are able to help us with our limited focus as people, help us identify opportunities in development of these kinds of things like DNA and protein and all these other applications of biotech. So as time goes on, I think those skills will become increasingly important depending on what field you go into. I think it's important to get your expertise as you go along, gain expertise as you go along. So highly encourage people who are interested in biotechnology to find a mentor or to find somebody they can speak with about the field. You know, I met mentors in the medical side of pharmaceuticals and biotechnology, so that's my passion. But if you're really interested in working in a lab or working in whatever specific space of the world of biotech, find people who have done those things or people who are studying those things at a higher level than you and reach out to them. And don't be afraid to start those conversations, because I think as a community, scientists are very willing to share knowledge and especially mentor up and coming scientists. So please, feel free to reach, or not just me, but anybody that you know in the field, I'm sure would hopefully echo the sentiment of being willing to at least provide some advice or some mentoring for somebody interested in pursuing a career.
Yeah, and like, is it that practical? I mean, you can't learn biotechnology from a textbook, right?
From a textbook, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can learn, about DNA and all the enzymes that go into replicating DNA and RNA and mRNA and transcriptases and all these other pieces that come into DNA. Sure, you can learn that out of a textbook, but the knowledge of the field in terms of how to conduct research and what the practical experience of working in biotech looks like, you're going to learn a lot more from talking to somebody who's doing it or who has done it.
So you really have to get out there.
Yeah, and I encourage people to do it. And the time to do it is at your age. You have the best excuse in the world to randomly reach out to somebody and say, "Hey, I'm interested in learning about what you do," because you're at an age and at a point in your life where you have a free reign over whatever career you want to pursue is kind of yours to pursue. Um, if you have an interest in pursuing biotech as a career as early as high school, you have years. You have probably almost a decade before you are going to be, actually applying to your final role, because you've got to go finish high school, you've got to go to college, and then you've got probably some advanced degree to achieve after your undergraduate career. So, um, that's probably another 8 to 10 years for most people your age. So, uh, you have that whole time to talk to as many people as you can about whatever it is that you're passionate about, regardless of whether that's biotechnology or not, and to really enlighten yourself about what that passion really means, what it looks like in practice, what are the opportunities. And not only does that give you it'll always open more doors for you, the more people that you know in the field, but it'll also just give you a more concrete idea of what you can get into, what you'll be doing. It might even give you the opportunity to connect with somebody where they can give you the ability to shadow them or to do an internship or to even just come, attend some guest lectures or something, that things that could be just really be interesting. The more you do that, the more you understand the field that you're passionate about, the more likely you are to find success in that field. That's been my experience. That's what I preach to anybody who asks me for any kind of mentorship. And I hope that you take that to heart, and any listeners of this take that to heart, that you're at a place now where you have so much opportunity, and people like me are always going to be willing to at least point you in the right direction, because we've been in your shoes. I've wondered what I was going to do with my career. I've been scared of the big world out there and how much there is and how challenging it can be. And a lot of my sanity was retained by people telling me, look, this is what you need to know. This is the right direction to take. This is, not the right direction to take. And just finding answers through people who have been through it already is really reassuring. So definitely encourage you to do that.
I agree. So involvement is the key.
Absolutely.
So once again, thank you for joining us, Dr. McCallum. We had a very insightful discussion today, and it gave our listeners a newer, fresher perspective on biotechnology. Thank you.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much for listening, and I hope this episode helped clear some of your doubts regarding a career in biotechnology. As for the next episode, we will be inviting a journalism expert over an apple pie. If that is something you're interested in, we hope to see you back at Career Cafe. Until then, feel free to leave your reviews and share this podcast. And if you wish to learn more, you can also check out our Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter pages. We would be keen to interact with and know more about our listeners.